Dr. Frankl, what is meant by logotherapy?
Therapy means healing, and logos means meaning. Thus, logotherapy is really healing through meaning, although this, of course, is an oversimplification.
In which respect does it speak to a present need?
One gets this impression, for instance, by the fact that my book, which has the title Man's Search for Meaning, has been printed in 300,000 copies, only the paperback edition. I wouldn't say that this constitutes an achievement or an accomplishment on my part, but in the first place, one should evaluate this in terms of a symptom on the part of the mass neurosis. In fact, today, the search for meaning is what has become frustrated, and people, our patients, complain that they cannot see any longer a meaning or purpose in their lives, and this feeling of meaninglessness, of emptiness, and of a vacuum, an inner void, is what induces them to come to psychiatry.
You know what the top category was? 78% of these American youngsters were concerned, as they expressed it themselves, with finding a meaning and purpose in their lives. So this is a realistic view on man. And you won't believe it, gray hair, my age, I started taking flying lessons recently. And you know what my flying instructor told me? If you are starting here, wish to get here, say east, heading for this, and you have a crosswind, you will drift and you will land here. So you have to do what we pilots call crabbing, he told me, C-R-A-B, crabbing. You have to head for north of this airfield, and you have to fly that way, you see, as if you headed in this direction. If you are heading here above this airfield, then you will actually land here. But if you head for here, you are landing here. This holds also for man, I would say. If we take man as he really is, we make him worse. But if we overestimate him, it's premature, your applause, you will soon know why. If we seem to be idealists and are overestimating, overrating man, and looking at him that high, here above, you know what happens? We promote him to what he really can be. So we have to be idealists in a way, because then we'll wind up as the real realists. And you know who has said this? If we take man as he is, we make him worse. But if we take man as he should be, we make him capable of becoming what he can be. This was not my flight instructor, this was not me, this was Goethe. He said this verbally. And now you will understand why I, in one of my writings, once said, this is the most apt maxim and motto for any psychotherapeutic activity. So if you don't recognize a young man's will to meaning, man's search for meaning, you make him worse, you make him dull, you make him frustrated, you still add and contribute to his frustration. While if you presuppose in this man, even in this so-called criminal or juvenile delinquent or drug abuse and so forth, there must be a what we call spark, a spark of search for meaning. Let's recognize this. Let's presuppose it. And then you will elicit it from him, and you will make him become what he in principle is capable of becoming.
We're going to meet Viktor Frankl, the internationally famous psychiatrist, writer, and lecturer. He deals with the most common ailment of our time, meaninglessness.
The lesson one could learn in Auschwitz and in other concentration camps in the final analysis was those who were oriented toward a meaning to be fulfilled by them in the future were most likely to survive. And this has been confirmed afterwards by American Navy and Army psychiatrists in Japanese prisoner of war camps, in North Korean prisoner of war camps, recently in North Vietnamese prisoner of war camps. The orientation toward a future, toward a task, a personal task, waiting for them to be fulfilled in their future, or another person whom they were loving, to be met again, to be reunited with them again in the future. This was what was decisively upholding these people. So the orientation beyond oneself, you see, the question was not just survival, but there had to be a why of survival. The question was survival for what, unless there was something or someone, a person or a cause, for whose sake to survive. There was survival scarcely possible.
Most of us have never been in the concentration camp experience. We've never had to go through that horror and tragedy, and so one would think that today it would be easier to find meaning in life. And yet, I sense that it's more difficult in a sense today than it was in years past. Do you think that?
You are absolutely right.
Well, why is that?
Because we are living in a society, either in terms of an affluent society or in terms of a welfare state. These types of societies virtually, or at least they are out, virtually to satisfy and gratify each and every human need. Consumer societies even creating needs, but the need for meaning, or as I'm used to referring to it, the will to meaning, remains unfulfilled. It's what I'm used to calling recently the unheard cry for meaning. You scarcely will find any reference to what is the most fundamental and basic concern of man. Neither pleasure nor happiness, nor power or prestige, but originally and basically his wish, his desire to find and fulfill a meaning in his life, or for that matter, in each single life situation confronting him. And if there is a meaning to fulfill, if he's aware, if he becomes cognizant of such a meaning, then he's ready to suffer, he's ready to offer sacrifices, he's ready to undergo tension, stress, and so forth, without any harm being done to his health. But if there is no meaning available, no meaning in his visual field, then he takes his life. And the meaning can be found everywhere, in the smallest hut. On the other hand, you find people who are millionaires and milliardaires and billionaires, and they have no meaning. They kill themselves.
We are talking about concentration camps and about the past and about the war and about the destruction. I would like to ask you, Dr. Frankl, if you see in today's world the forces of war, the forces of the enemies of the peace. Not only, I'm not talking about exclusively military war, if you permit myself to talk in that way, but in terms of interior peace, the peace of the human being with himself. Are you seeing right now in our world the forces of destruction becoming more superior than the forces of building up humanity?
You remember that I started with the assumption, or with the contention, better to say, that the human being is a being who decides, who still has to decide what he or she will be in the next moment. Now this precludes, makes it impossible to simply speak of forces within oneself, of forces that compel you to take a decision either in the one direction or in the other one. Because if you speak in such a vein, in such a style, you presuppose, or at least, even worse, make the man, the woman who hears, who listens to you, presuppose that we have to succumb to such forces. We are slaves. We are the victims.
Excuse me, what you are underlining is human responsibility.
The freedom, better to say. My good friend, Jerónimo Ángel Acevedo, once formulated in the following way in one of his lectures given here in Argentina. He said, a human being is not the son of his past, but the father of his future. Have I quoted you correctly? That is to say, it's in our hands the power, the freedom, even more, the responsibility to make a decision not in any direction, but in the right direction.
Now, let's try to extrapolate this wisdom of an astronaut, and particularly of Sigmund Freud. And let's ask ourselves whether perhaps the survival of mankind, and not of single man only, the survival not of single persons, but of humanity as a whole, of whole nations, whether this is only also, perhaps also, dependent on finding a meaning, having a vision of a meaning to fulfill. Isn't it possible that people could be, peoples, better to say, nations could be united not only as the so-called United Nations are, by governmental agreements and treatises, but united by mutual, by common endeavors and efforts. Just think of the prevention of another Chernobyl. Just think of the shared efforts for striving for a victory over AIDS. Now, anyway, I would dare to speak of a common will to a common meaning. But to be sure, all this presupposes a sound sense of responsibility, a sound sense and awareness of the fact that freedom, which is so much, so central to your constitution, that freedom is always threatened to degenerate unless it is freedom in responsibleness, freedom in full awareness of responsibility. And now you may perhaps understand, hopefully understand, why I so often recommend that the statue, your statue of liberty, be matched, be complemented, be supplemented by a statue of responsibility. Thank you.